Hey everybody, it's Mike Sullivan with Born to Shine. Today we have a super awesome guest. His name is Brock Brewster, and he's coming from Ohio. And man, Brock, thanks, brother, for being with us and taking some
Perfect. Thank
time.
you.
Yeah, perfect. So tell us more about your school.
Well, we are in rural southern Ohio, the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. We are the poorest district in the state, depending on what numbers you look at. Um, we are a combination of farming and woodland, so not a ton of industry. Um, we have this, you come down State Route 124 and just opens up into this really nice, pretty setting where we have our new school. So this building's been here since 2000 or since 1998. We had an older school built in the 30s and a combination of 3 or 4 different buildings that we use, and we consolidated everything starting in 1998 to this beautiful campus we have today that has about all of the modern amenities you could ever ask for in a school.
Man, that's awesome. So the original building was, did you say
The
1930s?
early 30s, and it was
Wow.
in Ohio. There was the Ohio School Facilities Commission really poured a lot of money into new construction in Ohio in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s, and we kind of got in on that. And lots of schools in our area got new schools within that 5 or 6 year period. So yeah, it just made it so much nicer consolidating everything together. We had no air
Mm,
conditioning in the old building. Heat was boiler based, and and a coal fire boiler, so it
yeah.
was not very efficient, not very comfortable. So I miss the old buildings in a lot of ways, but from an efficiency standpoint, there's no question that this new building is certainly where it's at.
Yeah, definitely. Probably sounds a lot more comfortable. That's good.
Mhm. Yeah.
So what was your journey like becoming a superintendent?
Well, it's kind of it's not it's a kind of a different story than a lot of people probably. It's nothing fancy, but I was born and raised right here. I can actually, if I was a great golfer, I could probably hit my parents' house from the parking lot here, just across the pasture field, over the baseball field is where my parents' house is. I was a 1992 Western graduate. I kind of did what I was supposed to do. I was kind of raised up, I guess, maybe to almost do what I'm doing now. Graduated from high school, went away to college, High University, got a biology degree, came back here and took over from my high school teacher and taught biology. And then I became a principal and became high school principal here for 7 years and transitioned from there straight into superintendency. So this has been I've been here my whole life, with exception. I got my first administrative job in an adjoining district, kind of learned how to make some mistakes and learn what to do and what not to do. Um, Part of the neat story is my uncle was my high school principal, and he actually passed away a year and a half ago from frontotemporal degeneration. And he was my mentor educationally and on lots of ways professionally. So I learned a lot from him, and I tried to do things a lot the way he did as high school principal. So it's not really anything dramatic, the journey, but it's kind of neat to be the superintendent of the school that you attended. I know the parents and the grandparents of the kids that I have here today. So I have a relationship with a high percentage of our students and staff members. I have several people I graduated with that are working here. So I'm their boss, I'm their coworker. So it's really kind of the neat dynamic. And some people don't like this dynamic, but some people do. You don't ever get away from the job whenever you're raised up in it like I am, like I was. So, but I wouldn't change it for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really cool. And you can get to your parents' house, well,
Yeah,
under a
sure.
2 minute
Yeah.
walk, I guess.
Yes, yes.
That's awesome. And when you were growing up, like for example, for me, in elementary school, I was bullied a lot, and I had some underlying, struggles with anxiety and actually even depression. And our listeners would love to hear when you were growing up, if you had any struggles.
I didn't have the anxiety issue, but I had a couple. I had ADHD. Of course, back then that was all undiagnosed. You just almost like suck it up, and I don't care if you have trouble sitting still and paying attention. You gotta do what you gotta do. It wasn't severe for me, but it did cause me at a young age because with my uncle being the high school principal and those things, I was expected to do well in school, and I was, I guess, halfway smart, and so I couldn't use anything as an excuse. So I just had to figure out how to do my life in a way where I learned how to compensate for those things. And so I spent my whole life dealing with ADHD also as an adult, and struggle with things like remembering appointments, getting off track, getting off topic, getting caught up into what I'm doing. I've always been an overachiever, and so high energy. And so as an adult, when I became super principal, I told my secretary I said, listen, my very first day being high school principal, first week, I forgot a very important meeting. And my boss wasn't very happy about it. It was with the juvenile judge. And so I told my secretary, I said, listen, she worked here when I was in school. I said, your number one job is to make sure I never forget another meeting. And so from that point on, I realized I had to put things in place to help myself with my disability, if you want to call it that. I had to find a way to cope with that. And so that's helped me over the years working with students to understand. I knew what it's like to not be interested in what I was learning, but still having to perform. So I've worked with kids over my 24 years with that understanding that it's not always easy. The teacher can tell a kid, just sit down and be quiet and get your stuff done. It isn't that simple. Depending on what that kid came from, we have focused a lot on SEL here in the last 3 or 4 years. Have done poverty training. I had that as a teacher of Ruby Payne, and have done a lot of poverty training and a lot of impact of poverty on the trauma and poverty on the brain, and couple that with our high drug incidents, combined with kids with ADHD, and only less than 7% of our parents have a college degree in this district. So all those things come together to create a student that oftentimes wants to do well, but isn't really equipped. So a big part of my goal as superintendent has been to try to help those kids, to try to take their barriers away, to realize the barriers are there, and to suck it up and just do it. It's nice to put on a slogan. It's nice to put on a commercial and just do it. But in reality, when these kids come with all those barriers, I can say just do it, but I have to figure out how to help them do it. So it's never that they can't do it, but it's you got to do it. Let's figure out how to get there. And so that's where we spent our money over the past few years in this district. That we put our money where our mouth is.
God bless you, Brock, because you said it really, really beautifully. And the fact that you struggled with ADHD, you got skin in the game. So you're not just saying, hey, just suck it up, sit still. You understand that it's more complex than that. That if someone has ADHD, it's not as easy as just sit still and focus. They need extra tools, and that's the part that you guys are investing in, and that's great because kids can succeed. They just need the right tools.
Yeah, as an adult learner, I mean, I actually was on ADHD medicine as a superintendent at one time, and for adult ADHD. And I will say it helped with the focus, but it decreased my energy level so much. I just had to decide if I could find a way to do it. And so I just started, putting coping mechanisms in place. And that's something I've always realized with kids is there's a way to get to every kid has the ability to learn and be successful. But if we don't help them figure it out, they are kids. They're not designed to figure it out on their own. They don't have the life experiences, not good life experiences anyway. So in a district that I live in and work in, our kids are survivors. They survived lots of trauma. We're a very poor area. Median income is $27,000 a year. I'll repeat that. The median income is $27,000 a year. Yeah, and so they survive on a little bit of nothing. And so the biggest struggle we have right now, and it is an SEL thing, is changing their mindset for them to believe they can do and be whatever they want to do and be. I didn't struggle with that because I had examples all over the place showing me you can come from here and you can be something. But that's something a lot of our kids don't have that example at home, and it's not their fault. It's not their parents' fault. So we have to show them. So we focus a lot on bringing that to the forefront. We bring speakers in. We bring in opportunities. We have a work program here at the school. So our job is to show them as often as we can success stories and put them in positions to reach success at a young age. You can't just teach them stuff, expect them to get out of school and transition that into being a successful adult. Being a successful adult, in my mind, starts from the day they start school. We really have changed our focus to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. We use a program called GRIT, that really focuses on freshmen and sophomores. And then by the time the kid's a junior and a senior, we are really focused on getting them into a career that they can be successful at.
I love that. I love that you're putting their mental health, their emotional well-being number one,
Yep.
because sometimes school superintendents flip it and they'll say academics absolutely are trumping everything. And then they wonder why, why are kids not doing well? Why are their grades dropping? Why are they acting out in class more? Why are they not getting involved? Well, that all has to do with their mental health.
Well,
So that's
all the research on poverty shows that if a student of poverty does not have skin in the game, if they don't feel personally invested, they will not invest in themselves. If they don't feel there's some type of gain, they will not invest in themselves. So we have to show them here at school work. There is gain from working. There is gain from being focused. There is gain from doing your best. And so we focus more on the process really than the end result while they're in school. So if we just contribute to the process the best we can, the end result will come. But you can't start the process when they're 17.
right.
You,
Too
you got
late.
to start the process whenever they're 11 and 12. And it's really about building a mindset that I can do this. It's not whether I can do it or can't do it. It's how am I going to do it? That's what we're really focused on with our kids, is trying to, it's not, failure is not an option. Not doing it is not an option. It's just how do we get there?
Absolutely. And I love it. And I'm gonna steal a line from a youth speaker. His name is Josh Ship. And he said, every kid is one caring adult away from being a success story. And
Yep.
I love how he said that, because it's so true. And in districts, it's usually the superintendent, someone like you, Brock, that makes that decision to bring in those youth speakers, or to bring in someone to show the kids, hey, here's the tools. Because like you said, they're born to succeed, but they need the method, they need the roadmap, they need some kind of map, they need some kind of method or tools to implement to change their life. So
And
it's
they
great
need
that you're doing that.
and frequent reminders of frequent chances to be successful. So small successes equal a positive mindset. So when I started this job 8 years ago, the number one goal was to change some cultural things that had been in place for a long time. First thing is we don't belittle kids. We don't yell and scream. Now I'm not saying a kid doesn't deserve a good butt ripping every once in a while, because they do. But the culture of yelling and screaming and that being the go-to, as a high school principal, I could give a good butt chewing, but my number one thing was when I was done, I made sure that kid understood why that all happened, and that's key. We can't assume kids understand why we do what we do. When I took over, the school was pretty rough. There was a lot of fighting and a lot of drugs, and over about a 4 year period, we've really from 2007 to now, we've really transitioned into a school that never has a fight. I mean, a fight is a rarity here. Catching a kid with drugs is a rarity here. And it's not because the kids all of a sudden want to be good. It's because we started focusing on the things we want to change. And so it's now an environment where there's not teachers sticking kids out in the hallways. You walk in the hallway and you see kids standing out with their nose against the wall. You don't see kids in the chair sitting out there while the rest of the kids are learning because the kid couldn't focus or because the kid was moving around. We've done a lot of work on SEL, and we realized, how do you deal with a kid who just can't sit still? Well, we let them move around. We try to create that and make that a structured moving around, and it's just but I decided I was not going to have teachers belittling kids or each other. And it's amazing how quickly, once that was established, how quickly it just went away. Teachers were looking, I think they were looking for an excuse or trained to do something besides yell and besides scream and besides be negative. And we're far from where we need to be, but we're a long way from where we started.
Yeah, that's so great. Reinforcing their positive actions
Yep.
versus smashing them down if they make the
Yep.
slightest mistake. That never works anyway. So
Yep.
that's great, man. You're a really good leader. And even I guess if it's in a whatever it is, maybe like a war movie of whatever it is, they always give that speech in the beginning, like, this is it, and we're going to fight for our community,
Yep.
and it's building up that it's basically modeling. That's
Yep.
really in the psychology world, right? Where you're modeling good behavior and you're modeling it for your staff, and then the staff does it for the students, and then the student, it's monkey see monkey do, really. And that's great. That's
And
great.
everyone has to be held accountable I told, I was a high school principal, then I've told my principals, you can't let staff members treat kids in a way that you know is not right. There's going to be, everyone has slip ups, and again, sometimes you need to show emotion. Sometimes you need to be to show that upset me. There's nothing wrong with that, but it has to be controlled. It has to be with a purpose. So it's like a coach. I've seen plenty of coaches, and I did it as principal too. Plenty of coaches give a butt chewing, not because they were mad, but because the kid needed to see some emotion. Because that display of emotion showed that I care enough to invest myself into getting upset. But it always had to be followed. It has to be followed up with, here's why I was upset. Do you understand why I was upset? And it can't just be stomping off and the kid wondering, man, what did I really do? That's always the premise but what it turned into was fewer and fewer instances of the adults needing to get upset. That's where we are now compared to 12 or 13 years ago. Is there aren't that many opportunities at this point to get upset.
Well, that it's great because you're putting the focus on clear communication.
Yep.
So the student knows, okay, here's why I'm upset. But more importantly, the reason I'm getting upset is because I care about you, and I
Yep.
see a lot of potential in you, and I see greatness in you. So let's get you back on the right track. That's how much you mean to me, and that's why I'm getting so upset. So
And
don't
never
take it.
assume.
Yeah,
Never assume they understand. I met with the coach last week, and I said, you can't assume that what you meant and what they heard or what they understood is exactly the same, because there's a disconnect, because you're talking from a 35 or 40-year-old person with lots of experiences, and all they're hearing is what you're saying. Maybe I said, so you got to check back with them to make sure, did what I said what I meant, and did they get what I was meaning? And I said, so we got to work on them both being, what I say and what I mean being the same. But if they're not, just in case, you always want to check. We make too many assumptions. We forget we're dealing with 11, 12, 13-year-old brains that don't have that may not necessarily have the ability to discern what we meant. We just have to be clear when we say it.
absolutely. No, absolutely. So they understand, and probably most importantly, they understand that it's coming from a loving place of nurturing
Right,
and
sure.
supportive and encouraging, not just smashing them down. So
Yes.
yeah, that's great. Brock, is there anything that I missed maybe asking you, or do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I do, and it's something that no one's asked me about. But if I get a chance to go stand at the Ohio State House and say this to legislators, I will. Unfortunately, COVID is kind of, from the sanction standpoint, with the quarantines, it's kind of winding down a little bit. But what no one talks about with COVID is this: when you have kids, that the school is their safe space, and we've spent all this time trying to, we have several counselors, we have multiple people whose job is to take care of kids. The biggest travesty of COVID has not been sickness on our kids. It's been the uncertainty, because the school was the number one most stable thing in a lot of their lives. And with COVID and quarantines, when you walk into the school, you're feeling perfectly fine. You're going to lunch, and all of a sudden, nurse calls you down and says you have to go home for 10 days because you were sitting beside somebody who has COVID. So that kid now is not away from the abuse. Maybe a situation where mom and dad's at work, and there's an abusive neighbor, there's anything, and this kid now, just all of a sudden, by no fault of their own, they went from being, there's plans for the week to go to a ball game or to go to a dance or whatever it might be. They now are yanked out of there and sent home because they were sitting beside the wrong of a kid at school. They're not quarantined 10 days. The mental aspect of COVID, because of with what I did to our kids, the uncertainty level was far bigger than anything physical for our kids or anything academic. It's been the emotional, the lack of stability over the past 2 years has had detrimental effects on our kids. And we've done our best to educate them. It's not, and their behavior is great. It's not anything to do with that. We took away they could come to school any day, and their safe space be yanked away from them for 10 days. Access to nurses, access to teachers, access to counselors, going for 10 days, and the protection going. And no one talks about how, especially with kids of poverty, how important rules and procedures and systems are to students of poverty. And that's what COVID did for our kids more than anything else.
Yeah, and I'm so sorry to hear that. Absolutely, because kids need consistency. They need
Sure.
structure.
Yep.
And if that's all taken away, of course, the repercussions are going to be pretty drastic on their mental health. So
Yep.
that's, man,
So
yeah. Well, you know what, Brock, you're doing an amazing job. You're running a great team, and I just thank you for sharing your time with us today. And man, keep up the great work,
I
Brock.
appreciate it. Thank you for having me. I grew up in my grandparents had a general store in Latham when I was growing up, and pretty much at that time there was no Walmart. There was not any. We had a Kroger in Waverly, but everyone did all their shopping in my grandparents' store. So I grew up working in the store as a kid. I started when my grandpa would let me bag groceries and stuff when I was 10, 11 years old, and so I learned at a young age. I saw the poverty mindset and how it impacted people, and they were good people. I love those people, and I still do. I get along with the poorest people in our school district are some of my best friends, and some of the people they would do anything for you. The thing about people of poverty that they remember who is not good to them. They remember who treats them well and who shows them respect. I've said it many times. Poor people don't have a lot, but they do have one thing: they have dignity,
Mm.
and we can't ever take that away. But I've described our area as a lottery ticket society. When your median income is $27,000, sometimes the only chance of ever having more than you have is to win the lottery. Well, we know what the odds of winning the lottery are, so it's amazing how many people buy lottery tickets when they don't have much money anyway. Because in reality, I used to get upset with that, and I used to criticize them. That's the biggest waste of money I've ever seen. I can't believe they're doing that. But then, as I went through SEL training, as I went through all that, I realized that is their only ticket to ever have. They can't, with their education level they may have or the circumstances, they're never going to make enough money to ever have enough to get that house that's a lot better or that new vehicle. One story, I had a student quit coming to school as a senior, smart kid, a nice kid, cut from a rough background. And I remember finally got her to school, got her in the office, and I sat her down. And I said, "Do you never want to have a nice house or a new vehicle?" She said, "Oh, whoa, whoa, hold on. I will never have a new vehicle." I said, "Well, why not?" She said, "Because if you get a new vehicle and you can't pay, if something happens you can't pay for it, your credit's ruined and you're ruined forever." I said, I said, it made me think. I thought, she's not thinking as a capable 17-year-old of someday I'll work hard enough to get a new car. Her mindset automatically is, I will never get a new car, so why would I necessarily even try? So our kids have learned to settle for a lot less than they can do, and it's not their fault. It's not even their parents' fault. Their parents aren't able to help them anymore than they can help themselves. But growing up here, I've always said I'll write a book, and someday I will, and it will be, I can't steal the exact title, but it'll be something to the effect of The Devil You Know. Because our kids of poverty in general, especially our kids, they're more comfortable staying in a bad situation that's at least consistently bad than to maybe get in a situation that could be potentially worse, potentially better also. But the longer you're in the situation that a lot of our kids are in, they see that as, well, there's more chance of it being bad than good. And so we have to get them in the right mindset that you can't limit yourself by how you were raised. But being raised up like I was and watching how my uncle treated the rough kids, the poor kids, the underprivileged kids, the kids that were just purebred hoodlums. I had kids that I was high school principal that I saw one last night at the store. "Hey, Mr. Brewster, how you doing?" I suspended this kid 10 times. I probably no telling how much discipline that kid got, but I did it with dignity. And he goes out of his way if he sees me, all these guys, because I always remembered, regardless of what they did, if I take their dignity away, there's no coming back from that. And I learned that as a kid at the store, watching parents buy beer and thinking, "Why are you buying? You have no money. Why are you buying beer and lottery tickets when you have no money?" Then as I got older, I realized, they're thinking, "What's an extra $10 for that case of old Milwaukee or whatever it might be?" Because $10 isn't going to help me get a better house, or $10 isn't going to help me. So if they didn't drink any beer or any cigarettes or any lottery tickets in a whole month, they managed to save an additional $120. That isn't going to get them anything better than they already have. So why not? why not enjoy it while you can? That's the mindset. And again, that's what I understand that from seeing it. And so that's what I always have to keep in mind, that our kids see sometimes. And again, I'm not blaming the parents for it because that's what they saw, but I can't just say, well, it's just how Western kids are. It's just how they are, and they're never going to change. No, it is how they are programmed, maybe, but it doesn't mean they cannot change, because I was born here, raised here, have 3 kids that will hopefully always live right here. My grandparents, my all 4 grandparents, my aunts, all my aunts and uncles, except for one who's a doctor in Columbus, just retired, live within a 12-mile stretch of the same highway. So we're not going anywhere. So the only chance of this community, we live around the 23 drug pipeline. The Florida straight up to Route 23 to Columbus to Detroit, Michigan. We live on that. The only chance of this community not becoming a statistic is for people who care and who have the power to make a difference, making a difference. If I don't do it, then my kids won't the place they're going to be living in won't be worth living in. So I have a limited amount of time to make the biggest difference I can, and I'm trying to bring as many people with me as I can.
I'll tell you, Brock, this is great. Because you're tapping into a deeper thought process. The lack versus abundance mindset, and the fact that you're trying to instill that in your students is wonderful. That they truly can do whatever they want, but they're being, like you said, programmed to have those limiting beliefs. That they can't do it, so why even try? Right.
One thing I take a lot of pride in is the kids right now that I had as high school principal and as a teacher. They now have kids in the pre-K all the way through maybe 6th or 7th grade, and they are better. They are very supportive of education in general. They're better parents than their parents were. And I say better than their parents were. That's not a knock on their parents, but from an educational standpoint and from an understanding of the importance of relationships with the school, with their kids, because of what we've done here. And it's certainly not just me, but because of our mindset here that we now have over the last 14 or 15 years, these kids that came through Western, during that time, just say from the mid 2000s through now, those parents, I believe, look at us as a school that wants to do the best for their kids. And so they're not the parents who are bashing the school. They're not the parents who are on Facebook bashing us and saying, I can't, that's exactly how it was when I went there. That's no wonder you don't have the right name. We don't get that. We have parents who are supportive of us, and they say, listen, when I was high school principal, if Mr. Brewster said you need suspended, you need suspended. I don't want to hear it. That's kind of how it was as a high school principal, because they knew me. And so that's been a very positive change, is the fact that our kids who are now parents are more involved in the educational side than their parents were. And that's if we can continue that trend, I think we'll see a big difference in our school district.
Now, how our listeners may be saying, okay, he went from living in poverty to the superintendent. Now, some of our listeners may be asking themselves, how do I do it? What would you say to them?
Well, I wasn't raised in poverty, but I was raised by, my dad was a farmer and my mom just had a regular job. And so based on the poverty guidelines, we would have been under the poverty guidelines as mathematically, but I didn't have a poverty mindset. But the big thing, we have had lots of kids come through here that were raised in poverty that got out of it. But the biggest thing, we can only control a few things. The one thing we can do is control the way we treat these kids as adults. And it is an absolute fact here that the kids that you hang out with will be, if they say, if you want to see where you are in 5 years, look who you're hanging out with today. And we've done that. We have seen our greatest success stories have been from the kids involved in school activities. So we try to have things that we provide that give kids opportunities to not go home to that environment that they may be the one home taking care of little brother or sister while my mom and dad are working or whatever it might be. And sometimes we have a lot of kids that have to do that. We have an after school program here that's called it's the 21st Century Grant, and we call it Hope 180. and we have about 100 kids involved in it in grade 7 through 12, mostly 7 through 10, that they voluntarily stay here so they don't have to go home. They are involved in stuff. That group of kids has got very involved with the coordinator, Mr. Dunn, and with each other, and they've kind of created their own identity. So now that's a group of kids who are becoming leaders, and they don't get in trouble anymore. And if they get suspended from school, they can't come out the after school program. So my mindset was never a poverty mindset. It was always a focus on success mindset. But in everything I've ever done myself, I've always tried to have a clear goal. I'm a farmer. I have about 100 cows, raise 100 Angus cows, or keep that many. I have to have a focus on where I want that cow herd to go in the end, or I'm just throwing a lot of money and just hoping for good outcome. I don't do anything just hoping for good outcome. I try to put everything I can in my favor. And in this job, I have a great staff, pre-K through 12. We all have the same focus. That is to help these kids be successful as early as we can.
So then for the listeners that are saying, okay, cool, got it. It's changing their mindset from poverty to abundance to success, right?
Yep.
Then what would, if maybe they're listening, if it's a student, and if they were to ask you, what's the first step? What should I do? What do you recommend?
All right. Our big theme here has been removing barriers. So we know our kids, because of finances, because of abuse, because of having so many aces in their lives, we know there are barriers sitting all over the place for those kids. So our goal is to help the kids understand when they get to a barrier, whether that's academic, whether it's social, whether it's emotional, whether it's financial, you don't just stop when you get to the barrier. There's always a way around, through, or over it. And so we have to give when I preach to my principals, I have 3 very good principals. I had a very good principal that just left, took another job last year, and this year in another district, is don't let them use that barrier as an excuse to quit. Every time that they come to a barrier and they are helped around it, they look at the next one as less and less obtrusive, less and less permanent, less and less daunting. So if we can give them multiple opportunities to get through barriers, when they hit one, they won't just give up and sit down and put their head down between their legs like they're in a tornado drill. They just got to think, well, daggone it. All right, it's another setback. I'm gonna push on through this one. I'm gonna find a way. So if we can create a system of kids, our kids are already survivors. Kids of poverty are already survivors. They got to understand they can apply that survivor mentality to everything, not just getting through a bad night at home. We have a ton of great parents, a ton of great kids here in our district, and even the poorest kids are lots of times our most respectful, our most engaged in some ways, but they're also the ones that you see this kid that came from a poor background, and you see that kid getting invested in something, athletics or academics or an after school program, and then when you see them become a good mom or a good dad, even if they don't have a great job making $100,000 a year, if they're a good parent, then their kid has a chance. We've done a lot. If they're better parents, if they're good parents for their child, maybe it does take a generation for them to break the poverty cycle. But what we've done is contributed to that cycle being broken.
Man, Brock, I love it. I don't even know what to say. I think what you're doing is extraordinary, really. And I've had a lot of superintendents on our podcast, and you're really taking care of the whole child. And that's not to say other superintendents aren't doing a great job too, because they are, but what you're doing in a district that has so many challenges, man, you're doing an incredible job, not only for your school, but for the staff, for the parents, for the students. I mean, for your whole community. So I really
appreciate
thank
that.
you for what you do.
Sure.
And thank you for being on the show.
Sure. Thank you.
Man, that's great.